So it's been a really good event. As I said a few minutes ago, I think maybe this last session is the most important of the whole thing, although there's a lot of competition there. But next, in just a few minutes, we're going to hear from Andrea Brandon and Patricia Patty Johnson, who have been tasked with listening carefully, asking a lot of good questions, having conversations, bringing their own experience and knowledge, and sharing that all back in the form of some synthesis, some ideas that they want to share back and sort of propose to us as ideas to tie together what we've heard and maybe some thoughts on how to move forward. Before we get to that, I want to make a quick thing here. Most of the speakers got one of these bags. One person's talk was judged maybe not to be good enough for it yesterday. And so I didn't give him one yesterday, but today's his birthday. And so I thought everyone would want to know. So you can consider this a birthday present, or you can consider it a thank you gift, whatever you want. Yeah. Well, Dan, thank you, and enjoy it. All right, let's get on with it. Andrea and Patty, you two are on. I'll get your timer started, and off you go.
Great.
Computer went to sleep.
Oh. Okay. So just a little intimidating, Eli, to say that this was the most important part of a two-day workshop when we had such amazing presenters as we've had. And that Patty and I have developed this presentation here over the past couple hours with not much preparation. So
the presentation is to keep us on track.
Yeah. So I think what we're gonna try to do, as Eli shared, is just kind of go through a little bit of what we've heard, what are some of those big aha moments, and what our takeaways are. We're going to highlight some of the things that we thought were perhaps missing, things that could be added to future workshops such as this. And then we'd also like to make this a little bit interactive as well. So we'll be asking a few questions. And so please go into the Slido?
Yeah.
Oh.
I'm not sure what it's called. But please go in there, and as we ask questions, we'd love to get some of your responses.
So I'm sorry, I told them I was going to mention it and I didn't. The code is FIRE, S-Y-N. It's the last one on the list, S-Y-N for synthesis. So sli, sli.do, and then the code is FIRESYN.
Okay, so we're going to start with just a review of what some of the presenters shared, and some of those salient points that we thought we want to go home with and share with you guys. The first one from all the two classification presentations, we are kind of struck with the diversity of ecosystems that we have in Minnesota. We've got 5 or 6 different ones when you get down to the ecological subsection, or to the sections, and then it breaks down even farther when you get down to the subsections. And there's just so much diversity in Minnesota, as we all know, and it's always a challenge for us, whether it's mesosite diversity or landscape diversity, which always makes it challenging to use fire here. And when I saw that map, I just thought, yeah, no duh, that's why it's hard to use fire. It's different in the Northeast as it is in the Southeast. Very different ecosystems, very different application.
But with all of that diversity, it was really interesting because Mike talked about some of the long-term history of fire on the landscape. And then John Allmendinger followed that up with that while we have this diversity, in some way, fire played a role in all ecosystems across Minnesota. So that fire is in many ways a fundamental factor of how the systems across the state have evolved over time. Oh, hold on, let's.
If it's not advancing, click anywhere on the slide. It does that sometimes, sorry about that. And then you should be able to advance the slide.
Oh, there we
Oh,
go.
there we go.
Okay.
Okay.
So part of the information we stole from people, like she said. Fire has always been part of the ecosystem. And then from Evan's talk, you know, we were just reminded, we all know this, but there's a lack of fire on our landscape the last 100 years or so. And I thought it was really interesting, the comparison he made for fire over a 5-year period just recently. And these are some of the largest fires we as humans have seen up in the Superior versus just 1 year that Heidenselman mapped out there. So just kind of a reminder to us what a deviation we have in fire use on the landscape.
And then it really struck me as again, Mike was talking a bit about the importance of fire and the function, outlining the importance of fire and the function, composition, and extent of many of our fire-dependent communities. And the fact, and I think I'm going to quote this, he said that these communities were not historically promoted through mechanical or herbicide treatments. So in other words, in many ways, timber harvesting and mechanical treatments cannot be a proxy in every situation for fire. However, just because these lands may have burned in the past does not necessarily mean they need to burn in the future, because that rests within what our value systems are. And so identifying what those values are really will be informing what that future management looks like.
And we stole this too, in terms of just a reminder of all the different factors that go into the vegetation of a system. And this comes true with a lot of things. I do some fire behavior analysis. There's all these factors involved in fire behavior analysis, and you can never model all of these factors. And so you never know which one's going to really drive your fire behavior on the landscape. It's the same thing with vegetation. One of these may come out as a more prominent factor in determining that type of thing.
And again, it really is what struck me. It was as we were looking at some of the predictions for what future systems would look like, prairies systems across the state of Minnesota, it made me think about the need to incorporate all of these different factors. So topography, geology, soils, and that there are a lot of abiotic contributors to biodiversity across the landscape. And so how we think about microclimates that are driven by landscape variation and topographical diversity. So as Patty said, this is all pretty complex stuff.
It just reminded me too, I know we have a lot of specialists here at this conference coming to learn more about fire's role in ecosystems. And you know, those soil scientists, those geologists, those hydrologists, botanists, they're all important in this, because as fire practitioners, we can't learn and know all of that. No, I went the wrong way. Okay, so the one thing that kind of struck me, and this slide didn't come out well, but just that message that a lot of these forests come from the glacial period, and that's how they originated. And then as part of that, the next one that really struck me, and I'm sorry, but this didn't come out, but this Laurentian forest that's up in the Arrowhead area, we talked about it as being boreal type of mix. That system has not changed a ton since glaciation. I think it showed on that chart, if you could see that whole chart, it showed like 2 or 3 different changes in vegetation. And that big period in between is thousands of years until present that it really hasn't changed a lot in terms of its fire dependency. Which also kind of made me think it'll be interesting to watch that system as we go through climate change, because it's been through a variety of different climates and existed how it is. So all those different factors that we talked about with that chart, the soils, hydrology, all of that. We'll see which one really plays out. Oh, there we go. Okay. Anything else?
So, you might be wondering what the heck this map is here. We didn't take this one from a presentation. We just decided to add it in. I want to express my appreciation for Evan Larson. Thank you, Evan, for acknowledging that today we are standing and sitting on lands that are within the Fond du Lac Reservation. And this is something that many of the speakers over the course of the past 2 days talked about. We talked about, and I heard a lot of our presenters and a lot of the audience ask questions about Indigenous peoples and the Indigenous voice. And I love this map. This is from nativelands.ca. I encourage you to check out that website. And this is a map essentially of what the United States would look like if we were looking at tribal territories. So within the United States, there's over 573 federally recognized tribal nations, and we should acknowledge, we should just pay attention to that and acknowledge that. And if you want to go one more slide, just looking here at Minnesota, every landscape in which we work is not only someone's ancestral territory, but this is contemporary lands as well. And that I think it's important for all of us to collectively acknowledge that these lands hold great historical, spiritual, and personal significance. However, the role of Indigenous peoples is not relegated to history, and that we all have a role to play in elevating the voice of our Indigenous partners, and in supporting Indigenous people's voice, choice, and action to support co-governance mechanisms. And Rebecca, I'm not too sure where you're sitting. There you are. You talked about some of the projects that you're working on and how some of the research that you've done has evolved to a form of co-development, co-governance. And I would encourage all of us to think that way, and that we collectively give our Indigenous peoples that are here, give them that voice, and that we think about Indigenous-led conservation and be more inclusive of Indigenous knowledge and ways of knowing. And so that was just something that I really felt strongly about listening to some of the comments made over the past 2 days.
And I'll add on to that. That cultural aspect of fire is so intriguing, and it made me think, how would you write a prescription for cultural objectives? And it would go back to the vegetation most likely, but really that it would be more of an emphasis on restoring a culture or that type of thing. So it was kind of intriguing to me. I think one thing we're missing today is probably, or this whole conference is probably a voice of Indigenous people and learning from them about why they use fire and where they use fire. I think there's a lot to learn. And I think before we talk about cultural burning, we probably need to learn more about that.
I feel like we could talk about that subject for a long time,
Right.
but in moving on to try to cover a synthesis of this full past 2 days, another one of the themes that stood out to us is this idea of restoration and what is restoration. And this is a question that I'd like to pose to you as, how would you define restoration? Do you want to put your definition into the Slido? I'd love to hear what you have to say. I know that if you were to ask an ecologist or a fire manager or a forester what that definition is, you'll likely hear a range from restoring to a range of natural variability, Perhaps it's restoring lands for a desired species or set of species. Or maybe the definition will include site productivity and stocking. And so I think that this was something that struck me, that having a common understanding as to what restoration means and what that is will be important as we move forward and thinking about how to put fire on the landscape, where we do it, and why we're doing it.
And as we heard all the talks about the application of fire in the different systems, the Oakland, the prairie lands, and the pine systems, there were some common themes that we found, maybe different applications in different ways, but there are some definite themes. And that speaks to the fact that I think we could have a whole week for Minnesota and how we do burning in different systems and learn so much from each other. There's so much there. But we did hear over and over that mesophication could be an issue in the future in terms of trying to restore fire, and something for us to keep in mind. And maybe we need to do an intermediate treatment before we burn in some of these to help prevent mesophication from starting.
You know, and on that point, as I mentioned earlier, that even though fire may have been in the past, can we bring it back, or should we bring it back to get desired effects? As we think about what those desired effects are, as we think about climate change, pests, invasives, this unknown future, and to whether or not restoring fire to some of these previously fire-dependent systems, will that in fact lead to greater resilience in the future? And so I think that that's an interesting question that I was thinking a bit about, tied in with this topic of mesophication.
Seasonality, we heard a lot from Rebecca about seasonality of burning for wildlife habitat purposes. It's common though through all of those. You're going to get different effects in different seasons. And we've been trying on the Superior to do more green season, summer burns, which is, we're just learning so many fascinating things about how to apply it in the summer, but also the effects of that. Multiple entries, definitely hearing that a lot. And I think that's actually emerged in the last few years of people knowing that on these really disturbed lands or lands where we haven't had fire for a long time, we're going to have to go in there many times to try and achieve the objectives we want with restoration or other objectives. I thought it was interesting with this talk about oak restoration that there was, though, a fine line between your intervals. With 5 years, you got one effect, but with 3 years, you got a different effect. And it wouldn't seem like it would be that much, but there is, details matter. Eli said that here at lunch. Some of those details do matter in certain systems, very fine tuning those things.
But then to quote John, don't wait for the perfect day.
Right. There's that balance we're all looking for.
So another one of the themes is that, you know, fire alone and fire being the only tool is not the answer, that we do need to use multiple tools. And I spend a lot of my time up on the Chippewa National Forest, in which we're dealing with, you know, red pine plantations and that we're looking to restore. There goes that word, to a bit more of a natural system. Ooh, what does that even mean? Right. So, but we're working in these pine stands, and some of them are just incredibly dense, that if we try to put a fire in them, it just is not going to be, it's not going to be pretty. So what we have to do is multiple entry thinning, do some brushing, prepare, do that site prep in order to get fire on the landscape. So that was another theme that we heard repeatedly in all of the systems that we're working in, is this idea of incorporating multiple tools in the toolbox.
I was also really intrigued with Brian's presentation I went to college many, many years ago. But in silviculture, we did talk about ecosystem or ecological silviculture and how to manage in terms of how a system would develop on its own naturally. And we're still talking about that, and we're still a long ways from maybe being able to do that. So I liked that Brian talked about that today. There's a lot of different tools to use to get that objective. And fire is definitely one that in the traditional silvicultural toolbox is usually lower on the priority, because the timber value is really what we're looking at a lot of times, or other higher priority values. So there's always these conflicting values, and I think Brian did a good job of explaining how you could maybe fit some of those together by adding fire at different places to meet the same objectives. And then maybe you're getting the benefits of fire at the same time too.
And as part of that discussion, Patty and I both thought that we could have had a bit more of a robust conversation on what are some of the real and perceived barriers and impediments to putting more fire on the landscape. We heard a little bit about char on red pine. And I think there's a whole slew of questions that I could ask. I'm not going to right now. I'll probably ask several of you afterward. But whether or not that's a real versus perceived barrier. And so I think that was something else that really struck us as an opportunity. And this kind of ties into this next piece of how we can bring researchers and practitioners together a bit more like what we are doing today, so that we can have some of those conversations, so that we can have the foresters and the ecologists and the botanists and the plant pathologists all come together and really start to have candid discussions on what are those barriers to getting more fire on the ground. That's something that we'd love to see.
Right. I'm actually curious how many people here are actual on-the-ground practitioners, burn bosses, firing bosses who are applying fire. And then how many people kind of consider yourself resource specialists that are supporting that are providing information and input into that. And then the researcher part of it. How many out there are researchers? So we have a great combination here. This is exactly what is going to get us there. But of course, this is 2 days out of a year. So how do we continue to try and share this information and communicate with each other?
And one more thing on that point is, actually, do we have a slide on it in the future? I can't remember. Do we? Case studies. I'm just going to talk about it here.
But that's okay. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is one of the comments that I heard repeatedly and just having some conversations with folks on breaks is, wow, there's so much research going on. I had no idea. How do I find out more about that? Or I heard a few folks say, oh, so much research going on. When can we start talking about some of the practical, implications or success stories or failures on the ground? And I think that I heard that a little bit more yesterday than today. And today we did hear some more of that on the ground implementation piece. And so I think that that's something that, folks who only came yesterday missed out. But something that we were talking about is this need for the development of case studies, and for us to really start to document what those successes and failures look like, and not just within a research context, but when we're out on the ground and we're just doing some applied tinkering. So how do we get that information captured and in a way that we can share with others?
Oops, I went backwards, didn't I? Okay, so a couple different ways that we were brainstorming on how it's happening now and how maybe those areas can be expanded. For folks that don't know it, there is a Trex going on this year in Minnesota. I think the first one maybe. So a training program, TNC is the lead on it, but it'll be on the Chippewa National Forest is hosting it.
The Leech Lake Band of Ojibwe, in collaboration with the Chippewa National Forest, is a host.
Yeah, okay,
Sorry.
there you go. No, that's okay.
So the primary goal of this TREX event is to provide training and learning opportunities for the fire practitioners, which I think more than half of you raised your hands, while at the same time furthering some of those long-term objectives of the partner whose land that we're on. This TREX event, because it's being co-hosted by the Leech Lake Band, Fond du Lac Band, folks within Grand Portage, I believe, are on the planning committee as well. Cultural burning is a big part of it. That's something that we are wanting to emphasize here. But the purpose of this TREX event, and TREX stands for Prescribed Fire Training Exchange, is really meant to, galvanize some of those partnerships, get work done on the ground, as well as to just further what those landscape objectives are. And so it's a 2-week-long training, and I feel like this is a shameless plug. But if you are interested in learning more about it, Paul, why don't you raise your hand? We should talk to that guy there, because he is one of the lead planners for this TREX event. But this is one of the ways that we are working with some partners across the state to try to bring some more of that training and learning opportunities on the ground.
So I wanted to mention real quick too, I'm not sure how many folks know, but within our MINIX organization, the organization that oversees a lot of the fire activity that goes on with the federal agencies in the state, there's a prescribed fire working team, prescribed fire and fuels working team. How many folks here are on that team? Oh, we do have quite a few, good. They end up providing a lot of oversight with policy related stuff, the smoke management plan, that type of thing. I think that committee is a good avenue also to help expand on information and knowledge and how to share. They often do field trips, but it's usually within the group. So I think there's maybe some expansion that could go on there.
I'll try to make this quick. We've got 3 minutes left, Patty.
Ooh.
So for folks who aren't aware, the Lake States Fire Science Consortium, as well as the Great Lakes Silviculture Library, are 2 sources that we have available to us where case studies and research and information exists. I'll say it's a little unfortunate that the Lake States Fire Science Consortium is a bit more focused on fire and the Great Lakes Silviculture Library is a bit more focused on silviculture. So this is something that I'd love to see and maybe work with some folks here on how we can get some more cross-pollination. Because I think it was Dan, you had said in talking about oak regeneration, if only we would have been working with those ecologists, we would have figured some of this out. So how do we get more of that cross-pollination happening?
Okay, last slide. So we kind of brainstormed with both Eli and Jack, sorry, on what other things could be included in a event like this. And there's so many of them. There's so much information out there, but some of maybe the hot topics that we were hearing this week that weren't around are on here. I would encourage you to maybe add other ones that you want to share with the event organizers that are important to you too. It'd be interesting to hear what other people we might have missed.
Yeah, so it was really interesting. I'd like to thank John for mentioning the role of collaboration and partnerships. I didn't hear that a lot. I'm sorry, excuse me. Likewise, Rebecca, you had talked about some of the wildlife avian response. I think that was something that was clear from some of the questions that were asked, was an interest as well. So those were 2 pieces that I thought were really striking that it seemed like we could have had a more robust discussion on.
Right. And there's always those policy barriers to us on the ground that are trying to implement these projects. And, you know, just brainstorming on how other people are dealing with them sometimes can be helpful, because there's typically an avenue around them or through them, but sometimes we don't know how to wade through the administrative side of things. So just being able to talk about that, I think, would be good. The risk associated with prescribed fire, for those of you that are burn bosses, you guys know this, you feel this when you go to light the match. It is all on your shoulders, you're lighting that match. And so you always wonder, am I going to be covered if something goes wrong in that circle of soils, hydrology, climate, weather, one of those things that I didn't anticipate that's out there that I can't know about every inch of that landscape. And I think having a discussion about how we assess risk, how we deal with risk as burn bosses, and what are some of our resources out there to work within that framework. I think that's it.
I think that's it. Right on time. Perfect.
Yeah, that was perfect. Thanks, you. I'm going to hand this to you now. There might be, I do want to open up the floor. Thanks a lot. That was a tough job and well done. Before we all wrap up, any quick burning, I didn't even do that. Any big things at the front of your minds that any of you would like to share before we go? Any closing comments from any of you?
So Eli, before this question, I just want to make sure we also recognize not just the Lake States. I want to make sure we recognize all Park Science Exchange and Joint Park Science Program. For the Lake States, we have myself here, obviously, but we also have administrative committee or principal investigators and board members here. And we have Craig Meyer here with the College of Green Oak Savannah Park Science Consortium. And then Joe and Mike are here, two presenters from the building. So that's that kind of collaboration out, and Greg's here, a board member from Pennsylvania, or North Atlantic Park Science Exchange. I probably missed others too. So we want to make sure that they help set a lot of this up. That's a great exchange, that we do across the country to send people around to
Yeah, thank you. That's great. In the interest of time, we're not gonna do an open Q&A. I just wanted to open up for any major issues that were on your mind. Lots of good comments on the online Q&A, the Slido things. What I'm gonna do, I've mentioned to some of our speakers, is I do not, it wasn't part of the deal, and I don't expect all of our speakers to answer every question, but I'm going to share the links with them and invite them over the next week to go in and post any quick replies that they want to any of the questions. I would encourage all of you to do exactly the same thing. You have all of the codes from your agenda, all of the codes, the fire park, fire pine, and so on are written right in your agenda. Feel free to go in and use that. I can't leave those open forever, at least I don't think so, but they will be open. I set them today to be open until February 14th. That's a Friday. And we will, I don't know what my archiving options are for that, but I'll try to save those. I think those questions and your votes on the popularity of different questions are a useful source of information for us for future events. So I did want to mention that if you want to go in and comment or that sort of thing, please do. A lot of people to thank. You've seen me at the front of the room a lot, but Jack, as I said previously, really deserves about 90% of the credit for the agenda and his network. Yeah. Craig Meyer and a number of our speakers were also on a planning team that started meeting a year and a half ago to begin framing this out, and all of them really weighed in meaningful ways. Matt Gravy was also involved in that, and I'm sure that there are some others. I know that there are others too. I want to thank all of you for being here. The turnout for this event is outstanding. We had 151 people registered and attending. That's great. We might have exceeded that with one SFPC event about 5 or 6 years ago on intermediate stand treatments. I'm not sure we did. But this is fantastic. This is really great. Your interest and willingness to spend 2 days with us really speak volumes about the priority of and the interest that we all have collectively in fire. And I think that's great. So thank you for being here. Thanks also for thinking about, and well, not thinking about, for participating in the online Q&A. That was new to me. I've been on the attendee side of that before, but I've never organized one of these things. The number of questions for the Pine panel this morning was outstanding. I think we approached 50 questions. We got through a bunch of them, but many of them are there. Thanks to all of you for trying that. You know, we try to make our events not all the same, try new things, and we may or may not repeat everything we try, but I think we will repeat that. And I appreciate you all diving in and giving it a try. Amy Shawnette, Lucia Fitz-Vargas, Kyle Gill helped with, well, Amy and Lucia helped with the recordings, which was very helpful, and the microphone, and many other small things, registration desk and other things. Kyle took a bunch of pictures and was our courier to run messages across the hall, which was very helpful. Lane Johnson just took the bull by the horns, which was great, and made things work over in the Stein room. Really appreciate that, Lane. I asked him to do that maybe yesterday morning, I think, or I don't know. He just kind of did it. So thank you for that. It was a huge help. I've mentioned Jack, all of our speakers, several of whom traveled a great distance, flew here to be here, really having your perspectives from other places, people we don't hear from all that often here in northern Minnesota. You know, wonderful to have different ideas and perspectives here. Thanks to our local speakers as well. I sure don't mean to exclude you. Rachel Elysiak is not here today, but was a big helper yesterday and just in a bunch of small ways as well. Madison Rodman hasn't been here at all because she took a new job, but did a lot of the work, both in our first iteration last year and again, preparing for this event. And she certainly deserves credit for that. All of our presenters, just about all of the slide decks that you saw here, I've converted them to PDF and they're now linked to the event page. So if you go to the event page the same place you went to find the registration link, you'll see that because Amy and Lucia did the recordings. We now have all of those recordings. They're not posted immediately, but I'll try to get them posted in the next several days. Some of you have said, oh, I'm really excited to share this or that talk with whoever. That's great. Go for it. Please do share those as widely as you want to, both the slides and the recordings. And I, again, ask that out of respect for the speakers, that you respect that it is their work, and you should get permission if you want to use figures or anything else from them. On page 6 of your packet, there's a link to an evaluation form. That doesn't work. I intentionally broke it because we need to do that differently. But know that I will send you an email with a link to the evaluation form. I hope to get that out tomorrow. I want to take some of the ideas that you put into that fire general list, as well as the ideas that Andrea and Patty just shared right here. I'm not going to do a list of 12 topics, but I will do a list of several and ask you to rank what's of greatest interest to you for future events. I'll probably send that out tomorrow, and we will nag you. We will nag you if you don't. We'll nag you until you fill it out. Well, not forever. We'll give up on nagging you, but we really, and that's sort of a joke, but we really do value and appreciate your feedback. It's nice to get a pat on the back, but it's much more useful to hear what we could do better next time. So, you know, we've got a pretty thick skin, and if you have suggestions, we really would value those and appreciate that feedback. I don't want to talk any longer than I need to. I think that's the end of my list. Is there anything else? Last word? Yeah.
Big thank you to you for leading this given master ceremony.
You're welcome. We love to bring big groups here, and you know, this is why we're here at the Cloquet Forestry Center and my organization, the Sustainable Forest Education Co-op. I really feel strongly that we're all better off when we come together and share what we know. We all come at an issue like this from different personal histories and different experiences, different ways of knowing, different ways of relating and touching the resources that we use. And I just find gatherings like this really exciting and interesting, and I appreciate all of you being here. This is fun for me. Yeah, Dan.
Thanks for the share.
Yes. Yeah, Jim Vanook does a great job. Yeah, Alex in the kitchen is wonderful too. Yeah, they did a great job. Thanks everyone for coming. Safe travels home, and I hope we'll see you again.